The dimly lit room reeked of desperation. A single flickering bulb dangled precariously from the low ceiling, casting long shadows over the rows of crates, cages, and questionable merchandise. The black market was no place for sentiment, but even the most hardened of criminals avoided certain trades. Slavery, however, remained a grim exception. Derek Vance stood in the middle of the chaos, arms crossed, his expression one of muted disinterest. He wasn't here to shop, he was here to collect. The air was thick with the hum of various languages, the clatter of deals being struck, and the faint buzz of concealed weapons humming at the hips of buyers and sellers alike. Derek wasn't intimidated. He had been part of this life for too long, and his reputation as a smuggler who always got the job done preceded him. Vance, a voice called out, sharp and deliberate. Derek turned to face a short, wiry man with jittery hands and darting eyes. His name was Rilko, and he owed Derek 10,000 credits, an amount that wasn't small enough to overlook but not large enough to risk a blood feud over. "You've got my credits, Rilko?" Derek asked coolly, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Rilko winced, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not exactly. Got something better." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Better?" Yeah, Rilko said, gesturing eagerly. "Rare. One of a kind. Could sell for double what I owe you, easy." Derek's skepticism deepened. "Show me." With a nervous chuckle, Rilko led him through the maze of stalls and crates until they stopped at a reinforced cage tucked into a corner. Inside sat a figure, motionless and shrouded in shadow. Derek's first thought was that it was some exotic animal, valuable sure, but not worth the trouble. Then the figure shifted, stepping into the light. It wasn't an animal. It was an alien. Humanoid in form but unmistakably not human. The alien's skin shimmered faintly in hues of silver and blue, as if moonlight had been woven into its very essence. Its eyes were large, almond-shaped, and glowed faintly with an inner light. It was wearing little more than tattered fabric, its posture both proud and defiant despite the shackles around its wrists and ankles. "This is a bad joke, Rilko," Derek said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm not in the business of trafficking people." Rilko raised his hands defensively. "Not a person. Property. And not just any alien. This one's from the Xilith Empire. You know how rare it is to get your hands on one of them? They're practically untouchable. This one's a rebel. High value to the right buyer." The alien's gaze locked onto Derek's, and for a moment, he felt an unsettling mix of hatred and something else, something almost like curiosity. The intensity of its stare made him uneasy, but he didn't let it show. "I don't deal in slaves," Derek said firmly. Rilko shrugged. "Your call. But if you're not taking it, I'll sell it to someone else and settle your debt that way." Derek hesitated. He knew Rilko wasn't bluffing, and leaving the alien here to be sold off to someone far less scrupulous didn't sit right with him. He didn't have to like it, but the black market had its own kind of justice, harsh and unforgiving. If he walked away now, the alien's fate would be sealed. "Fine," Derek said finally. "But we're square after this." Rilko grinned, visibly relieved. "Square as can be, my friend." The transaction was quick. Derek signed off on the deal, and the cage was unlocked. The alien stepped out, its movements fluid and precise despite the chains. Derek noticed the scars on its wrists, signs that the shackles had been there for a long time. "What's your name?" Derek asked as they walked away from the market. The alien didn't answer. It simply stared at him with those glowing eyes, unblinking. "Right," Derek muttered. "I'll call you Moonlight for now." If the alien was offended, it didn't show. Back on his ship, the Raven's Edge, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake. Moonlight sat silently in the corner of the cargo bay, its posture rigid, its eyes constantly scanning the room. Derek had released the chains, but the alien hadn't moved from its spot. "You can talk, right?" Derek asked, leaning against the wall. Moonlight's gaze flicked to him. "I can," it said, its voice soft but edged with defiance. "But I choose not to." Derek snorted. "Suit yourself. Just don't cause any trouble." "I am not your property," Moonlight said, its voice suddenly sharp. Whatever deal you made with that wretch does not bind me to you. Good, Derek replied evenly. Because I don't want a slave. The alien tilted its head, as if assessing the truth of his words. After a moment, it said, Then why take me? Derek didn't have a good answer, so he didn't give one. Over the next few days, Moonlight proved to be both a nuisance and an enigma. It refused to eat the processed food Derek kept on the ship, instead rummaging through the supplies to find anything remotely fresh. It didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, its answers were curt and cryptic. Derek couldn't help but wonder what had led to Moonlight's capture. The Xilith were known for their advanced technology and unyielding dominance. For one of them to end up as a rebel, let alone a prisoner, was almost unheard of. One night, as they drifted through the quiet void of space, Derek found Moonlight staring out of the viewport, its glowing eyes fixed on the stars. You miss it? Derek asked, surprising himself with the question. Miss what? Moonlight replied without turning. Wherever you're from. Your home. Moonlight was silent for a long time before finally saying, It was not my home. It was my prison. Derek frowned. The Xilith Empire? Moonlight nodded. We are born into servitude. Our lives are dictated by the will of the collective. Those who resist are dealt with. And you resisted. Yes. Derek didn't press further. He had seen enough of the galaxy to know that freedom was a relative concept. To some, it was a right. To others, it was a luxury. As the days turned into weeks, an uneasy truce formed between them. Moonlight began to speak more freely, though it remained guarded. Derek learned that its real name was Kaelar, and that it had been part of a rebellion against the Xilith Collective, a rebellion that had cost it everything. In turn, Derek shared fragments of his own past, a childhood spent on a dying Earth, a career forged in the lawless expanse of space, and the many mistakes that had led him to this point. He didn't know why he opened up to Kaelar, but something about the alien's quiet intensity made him feel understood in a way he hadn't felt in years. The turning point came when a bounty hunter intercepted the Raven's Edge. The hunter, a hulking brute with more muscles than brains, had been tracking Kaelar for weeks. The Xilith Empire had placed a substantial bounty on the rebel's head, and the hunter was determined to collect. Derek could have handed Kaelar over and walked away richer, but he didn't. Instead, he fought, harder than he had fought for anything in a long time. Together, he and Kaelar managed to outwit and overpower the hunter, sending his ship spiraling into the void. As they patched up the damage to the Raven's Edge, Derek finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him since the day they met. What happens now? Kaelar looked at him, its expression unreadable. I cannot go back to my people. And I cannot stay here. Derek nodded slowly. Then we'll figure it out. Together. For the first time, Kaelar smiled, a small, fleeting thing, but genuine. And for the first time in years, Derek felt like he had a purpose. The galaxy was vast and unforgiving, but somewhere in its endless expanse, Derek and Kaelar found something neither of them had expected: hope. Over time, the relationship between Derek and Kaelar shifted from one of reluctant coexistence to genuine camaraderie. The Raven's Edge became more than a refuge. It was a proving ground where trust was forged under fire and silence gave way to understanding. Kaelar's knowledge of the Xilith Collective proved invaluable. The alien's insights into the Empire's tactics and technology allowed Derek to pull off smuggling runs that would have been impossible otherwise. In turn, Derek taught Kaelar the finer points of survival in the unregulated territories: how to spot a double-cross before it happened, how to negotiate without words, and most importantly, how to navigate the precarious line between freedom and obligation. But their fragile peace was tested when a distress signal interrupted a routine supply run. The signal was faint, encrypted, and unmistakably Xilith. Kaelar recognized it immediately and froze. It's a trap, Kaelar said, the words clipped and final. The collective doesn't send distress signals. Derek studied the coordinates. The signal originated from a derelict station orbiting a gas giant in a remote sector of space. It wasn't on any official maps, which made it all the more suspicious. Trap or not, Derek said, it's worth investigating. If we can salvage anything valuable. Kaelar's hand shot out, gripping his arm. You don't understand. If the collective is involved, they won't stop until they've eliminated the threat. They'll kill you just for being here. Derek shrugged off Kaelar's grip. I've been dodging death my whole life. This is no different. Kaelar's expression hardened. You are reckless. Foolish. This will cost you more than you realize. Despite Kaelar's warnings, Derek made the decision to approach the station. As they neared the location, the Raven's Edge was enveloped in an eerie silence, the hum of its engines the only sound. The station loomed ahead, its structure battered and corroded, like a ghost from a bygone era. Docking was straightforward, but the interior was anything but welcoming. The corridors were dark and cramped, the air thick with the smell of decay. Flickering lights cast distorted shadows on the walls, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the halls. Kaelar was on edge, every muscle tense as they moved deeper into the station. Derek kept his blaster drawn, his instincts screaming that they were being watched. It wasn't long before they found the source of the signal. In a small control room, a single figure slumped over a console. It was another Xilith, its skin dull and its body lifeless. Kaelar knelt beside the fallen alien, his expression unreadable. This one was a scout, Kaelar said quietly. A low-ranking observer. They were searching for something. Or someone, Derek said, glancing at Kaelar. Before Kaelar could respond, the console crackled to life, displaying a series of unfamiliar symbols. Kaelar's eyes widened as he scanned the screen. They know we're here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As if on cue, the station shuddered violently, and the lights flickered out completely. Derek barely had time to steady himself before the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the halls. Move, Kaelar hissed, pulling Derek toward an exit. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos. Armed Xilith soldiers poured into the station, their sleek armor glinting in the dim light. Derek and Kaelar fought their way through the narrow corridors, using every trick and tactic they could muster. Kaelar's agility and precision were matched only by Derek's resourcefulness and unyielding determination. They barely made it back to the Raven's Edge alive. The ship's engines roared to life as Derek piloted them away from the station, dodging a barrage of energy blasts from pursuing Xilith vessels. Kaelar worked furiously at the co-pilot station, rerouting power and deploying countermeasures to keep them one step ahead of their enemies. When they finally jumped to hyperspace, the tension in the cockpit was palpable. Derek slumped back in his seat, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Kaelar was silent, his gaze fixed on the stars streaking past the viewport. That was intense, Derek said, attempting to lighten the mood. Kaelar didn't respond. After a long moment he said, I told you it was a trap. Derek chuckled weakly. Yeah, well, you were right. Again. Kaelar turned to face him, his expression a mix of frustration and something softer. Concern, perhaps. You risked everything for a signal that wasn't yours to answer. Why? Derek shrugged. Because it's what I do. I take risks. Sometimes they pay off. And when they don't, Derek's smile faded. Then I deal with it. Kaelar studied him for a moment before nodding. You are reckless. But you are also brave. Derek raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment? An observation, Kaelar said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The incident at the station marked a turning point for both of them. It was a reminder of the dangers they faced, but it also solidified their partnership. Kaelar began to trust Derek in ways he hadn't trusted anyone before, and Derek found himself relying on Kaelar not just as an ally, but as a friend. Their journey was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and the Xilith Collective was relentless. But for the first time in years, Derek felt like he wasn't facing it alone. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, a smuggler and a rebel, defying the odds and carving out their own place in a universe that wanted them both dead. And somewhere, in the quiet moments between the chaos, they found something even more valuable than survival, the hope of freedom. For both of them. Life aboard the Raven's Edge settled into a strange rhythm. Kaelar, though still cautious, began to open up more, sharing fragments of Xilith culture that Derek had only ever heard about in smugglers' rumors. Derek, in turn, found himself explaining the intricacies of human life. Stories of Earth, long lost to the ravages of environmental collapse, and the resilience that had pushed humanity to the stars. Kaelar had an insatiable curiosity. The alien often asked questions that surprised Derek with their depth. Do humans believe in destiny? Kaelar asked one day as they worked on repairing a faulty shield generator. Some do, Derek replied, wiping grease from his hands. Me. I think we make our own fate. What about you? Xilith got some grand cosmic plan. Kaelar hesitated, his luminous eyes distant. The collective teaches us that we are born with purpose, but that purpose is not ours to choose. For those like me who rebel, we are cast adrift, without meaning. Derek paused, considering his response. Sounds to me like you're freer than you think. You get to decide what your purpose is now. Kaelar didn't answer immediately. Instead, he returned to his work, though his movements were slower, more contemplative. Their uneasy peace was disrupted when Derek received a message from an old contact. Saria Tal, a former smuggler turned information broker, was as sharp as they came. If she was reaching out, it wasn't for a social call. The message was brief. Derek, I've got a lead on something big. Xilith Tech. Cutting edge. Could be worth a fortune. Meet me at the coordinates attached. Bring your friend. Kaelar read the message over Derek's shoulder, his expression darkening. This is a trap. You're awfully pessimistic, Derek replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling that Kaelar might be right. Saria's good people. She's saved my skin more times than I can count. And what does she want in return? Kaelar asked, his tone skeptical. Just information, Derek said. That's her thing. Kaelar didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue further. The coordinates led them to a remote outpost on the edge of a dying star system. The station was small and utilitarian, its dull gray exterior barely distinguishable from the asteroid it clung to. Derek and Kaelar docked the Raven's Edge without incident, though Kaelar's unease was palpable. Inside, the station was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and dimly lit rooms. Saria was waiting for them in a cramped lounge, her sharp features framed by dark hair pulled back into a tight braid. She greeted Derek with a quick hug and Kaelar with a wary glance. So, this is your new partner, she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Something like that, Derek replied. What's this lead you've got? Saria leaned back in her chair, her expression turning serious. Word is, the Xilith are developing a new weapon, something that could tip the balance in their favor. A prototype went missing a few weeks ago, and they're scrambling to recover it. If we get to it first, well, you can imagine the payoff. Kaelar's eyes narrowed. And where is this prototype? Saria hesitated. That's the catch. It's on a Xilith-controlled planet. Heavily guarded. But I've got a way in. Derek crossed his arms. You're asking us to break into a Xilith stronghold and steal their most prized possession? Sounds like suicide. Saria smirked. Not if you play it smart. And besides, when have you ever been one to back down from a challenge? Derek glanced at Kaelar, who was watching Saria with a mixture of suspicion and intrigue. What do you think? He asked the alien. Kaelar's expression was unreadable. This weapon could be catastrophic in the wrong hands. If we do this, it is not for profit. It is to ensure it never sees use. Saria rolled her eyes. Whatever helps you sleep at night. The mission was a high-stakes gamble. The planet, known as Xilith 4, was a fortress world with layers of defenses that would make any seasoned smuggler think twice. Saria's plan relied on stealth, deception, and a bit of luck, none of which Derek felt particularly confident in. Their insertion went smoother than expected. Disguised as traders delivering supplies, they managed to get past the initial security checks and into the facility's outer perimeter. From there, it was a tense game of cat and mouse as they navigated the labyrinthine compound. Kaelar was in his element. The alien moved with a grace and precision that left Derek in awe, anticipating every patrol and bypassing every security measure with ease. Derek, for his part, relied on his charm and quick thinking to talk their way out of any close calls. They reached the prototype's location, a heavily guarded laboratory, without incident. The weapon itself was unlike anything Derek had ever seen. It was a sleek, obsidian device that pulsed with a faint, ominous light. Kaelar studied it for a moment before speaking. This is not just a weapon, he said, his voice grim. It is a catalyst. If activated, it could destabilize entire ecosystems. Great, Derek muttered. So how do we get it out of here? Kaelar didn't answer. Instead, he began dismantling the device with practiced efficiency, his movements quick but deliberate. What are you doing? Saria hissed. Neutralizing it, Kaelar replied without looking up. It cannot be allowed to leave this place intact. Saria scowled but didn't argue. Derek kept watch, his blaster at the ready, as Kaelar worked. The process took longer than any of them would have liked, and by the time Kaelar finished, alarms were blaring. Their escape was a blur of chaos and violence. They fought their way through waves of Xilith soldiers, narrowly avoiding capture at every turn. By the time they reached the Raven's Edge, they were battered, exhausted, and out of options. As the ship blasted into hyperspace, leaving the chaos of Xilith far behind, Derek collapsed into the pilot's seat. Saria sat across from him, her expression unreadable. Well, she said finally, that was a disaster. Kaelar, standing nearby, met her gaze. The device is neutralized. The Collective will not be able to use it. And what about us? Saria shot back. We're on every Xilith hit list now. Derek smirked. Wouldn't be the first time. Kaelar's expression softened. We survived. That is enough. For the first time, Derek realized that Kaelar wasn't just a reluctant ally or a burden he had taken on out of guilt. He was a partner, a true equal. And together, they were capable of facing anything the galaxy could throw at them. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, they weren't running anymore. They were fighting back. The Raven's Edge drifted through the quiet of hyperspace, the hum of its engines a soothing backdrop to the tense silence in the cockpit. Derek leaned back in his seat, his mind racing as he replayed the events on Xilith 4. Saria had retreated to her quarters to lick her wounds, leaving Derek and Kaelar alone in the control room. You didn't have to destroy it, Derek said finally, breaking the silence. We could have sold it, dismantled it for parts, anything but this. Kaelar turned to him, his expression unreadable. And if it had fallen into the wrong hands? The Collective would have spared no expense to recover it. Your black markets are no safer than their strongholds. Derek sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, well, now we're public enemies in half the galaxy. That's a lot of heat for one smuggler and a rebel. Kaelar's lips twitched in what might have been the beginnings of a smile. You have survived worse, haven't you? Barely, Derek muttered. He studied Kaelar for a moment, noticing the alien's weary posture. You all right? You've been running full tilt since we got back. Kaelar hesitated, then nodded. I will recover. My concern now is what comes next. The Collective will not let this go unanswered. Derek rubbed his temples. He hated how right Kaelar was. The Xilith were nothing if not relentless, and now he and his ship were firmly on their radar. He glanced at the navigational console, the display showing their current course, a series of random jumps designed to throw off any potential pursuers. We'll lie low for a bit, figure out our next move, Derek said. Saria will want out. She's not built for this kind of heat. But you and me, we've got options. Kaelar raised an eyebrow. And what options do we have? Derek smirked. The way I see it, we can either run for the rest of our lives, or we can hit back. Kaelar's expression turned serious. Hitting back is dangerous. The Collective's reach is vast. Yeah, Derek said, leaning forward, his eyes alight with determination. But they've got weak spots. We just need to find them. Kaelar studied him for a long moment. You are serious. Damn right I am, Derek said. You think I'm gonna let them keep chasing us forever? No way. If we're going down, we're doing it on our terms. Kaelar's gaze softened, and for the first time, Derek thought he saw a glimmer of something like hope in the alien's eyes. If you are truly committed to this, then I will stand with you. Their first step was gathering allies. The Xilith Collective was a behemoth, but even giants had enemies. Derek and Kaelar reached out to the fringes of galactic society. Pirates, smugglers, exiled leaders, and anyone with a grudge against the Collective. Saria, though reluctant, proved instrumental in making connections, her vast network of informants and brokers opening doors Derek couldn't have on his own. Not all of their attempts bore fruit. Many were too scared or too cynical to join their cause, dismissing it as a suicide mission. But a few saw the opportunity for change and profit and pledged their support. Among them was a Xilith engineer named Tenna, whose expertise in hacking and sabotage was unmatched. There was also Jorik, a grizzled human mercenary who had spent decades fighting in the shadow wars of the Outer Rim. Together, they began to form the skeleton of what Derek jokingly referred to as a resistance. Kaelar, however, was no longer joking. His demeanor shifted as their plans took shape, his sense of purpose growing stronger with each step they took. He worked tirelessly, coordinating efforts and using his insider knowledge to pinpoint key vulnerabilities in the Collective's vast infrastructure. It wasn't long before their first opportunity presented itself. A Xilith supply convoy, carrying critical resources to one of their outer colonies, was scheduled to pass through a relatively unprotected trade route. It was the perfect target, low risk, high reward, and a chance to send a message. The ambush was meticulously planned. Tenna disabled the convoy's communications, leaving them unable to call for reinforcements. Jorik's team provided cover fire, creating chaos while Derek and Kaelar boarded the lead transport to seize the cargo. Kaelar moved with precision, his every action deliberate and efficient. Derek couldn't help but marvel at how far the alien had come since their first meeting. Gone was the distrustful rebel struggling to survive. In his place stood a determined leader with a clear vision for the future. The mission was a success. They secured the cargo, a cache of advanced weaponry and medical supplies, and vanished before the Xilith could mount a counterattack. The victory was small, but it sent ripples through the galaxy. Word spread of a rogue crew striking back against the Collective, and more people began to take notice. As their resistance grew, so did the stakes. The Collective responded with increasing aggression, deploying hunters and assassins to eliminate the threat. The Raven's Edge became a symbol of defiance, its name whispered in hushed tones across the galaxy. For Derek, the fight was personal. The Xilith had taken everything from him, his freedom, his future, and his faith in the system. Now, for the first time, he felt like he was making a difference. He wasn't just surviving. He was fighting for something bigger than himself. For Kaelar, the resistance was a chance to reclaim his identity. No longer a nameless rebel or a pawn of the Collective. He had found a purpose that was truly his own. And in Derek, he had found an ally who believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. Their journey was far from over. The Xilith Collective was a formidable enemy, and every victory came at a cost. But as the stars stretched out before them, Derek and Kaelar knew one thing for certain. They would not stop until the galaxy was free. Together, they were more than a smuggler and a slave. They were a spark of hope in a universe desperate for change. And sometimes, a spark was all it took to ignite a revolution.